They are not a myth. We actually get on and ride Flite Efoils. I was joking around with the rep who graciously came down with a couple of Flite boards and did a head-to-head ride and review with us with our Lift Efoils. I'd never seen one. I thought they were a myth, the Yeti of Efoils. But sure enough, they're right here in Texas, and we were able to get out there and evaluate and ride them. So this is kind of the results of that ride and review. So we're going to get right into it. Flite boards and Lift Efoils are both very similar. We were impressed with the Flite design, just different. They do some things differently, but yeah, basically the same. On the water, very similar ride in both instances. So each company made design choices to go one way or the other, and that affected the overall outcome of the design. But yeah, different, but both very high end, both very good efoils. So we're gonna kind of give you some general videos here of kind of how things work. You can see Chris putting the battery in the Lift efoil, getting ready to go. And then the Flite foil before that. You can see just how similar they are. You know, both have big batteries underneath where you put your feet. Both are secured with a few hookups. The big difference for me is the construction, the materials that they use in the construction, and then where the motor and wings are placed on the mast. And these are design choices that were driven by just some of the choices they made. So here's a side view graphic of each efoil. Lift is on the left and Flite on the right. First thing you notice is the placement of the motor. The lift system is all made of carbon wings, mast, fuselage, and board. And the CPU, or control computer, is located inside of the board. So carbon's a really good insulator. So one of the design choices Lift made with an all-carbon system is they had to figure out a way to cool the processors and computer parts inside of that panel, inside the board. And they chose to use a water cooling system that's like a pump-driven system, which is really efficient. Pumps water through clear tubing and then cools the internal parts. The intake is right in front of that motor, right on the mast there, and it pumps it up through the mast, through the computer parts, and it comes down actually in an output just behind the mast on the board. Works great. It's a very efficient cooling system. Having the pump cooling system gave Lift an enormous amount of flexibility in terms of making an all-carbon setup. On the Flite side, they do not use a pump cooling system. They actually use a direct cooling system where their CPU is actually connected to an aluminum mast, and that conducts heat down through that mast, and that mast transfers the heat to the seawater on the outside, and that's how they keep their cooling, all their chips cool inside their motherboard. And you can see here in the picture, that's why their CPU or control system is mounted directly to the top of the mast. It's actually one piece. Okay, so now to compare the differences. Lift has a carbon mast, high motor mount, pump cooling system, and a carbon fuselage. The Flite system has an aluminum mast, low motor mount, direct cooling, which is the heat transfer through the aluminum mast, and an aluminum fuselage. So here's the outcome from these differences, okay? Having a high motor mount on the Lift, when you go to breach that, even if you're really cranking the angle of attack, the motor breaches first, which is great. It makes a bunch of noise, then automatically kind of brings you back into the water without pitch poling, tipping forward and actually rolling on the board. I was surprised to find out the Flite, even with that lower motor mount, actually does the same thing. I was able to come up, the motor actually aerates and then brings you right down. It's really gentle. I did not know it was going to be like that. One of the downsides to having a direct cooling system like Flite is they have to use aluminum or some other metal or high conductive substance for their mast, which makes it real flexy. Again, I assumed that this would be an issue on the water. I couldn't feel it on the water, even though on the beach, I mean, I could move that mast back and forth. It was not nearly as stiff, not even close to as stiff as the Lift system with the all-carbon mast. So the other downside is that controller needs to be part of the mast setup, as you can see in that picture. I don't know how that's going to affect replacement costs. I'm guessing that that's going to be a very expensive setup to replace down the road. But again, on the water, it was amazing because these both of these boards flew and felt very similar. They're about the same weight, and they felt very similar out on the water. The big differences were the control interface with the hand controller, and we'll get into that next. So both Lift and Flite use Bluetooth connected floating hand controllers. The Lift floats and just has like I think it goes around your hand. The Flite actually has a lanyard that goes around your wrist. I'm assuming it floats. I didn't actually ask or try it. But the big difference is kind of how the hand controller interfaces with the board and how the hand controller is used on the water. The Flite hand controller actually engages the board into action. Here it is. It's smaller than the Lift. You put the lanyard around your wrist, and you're out in the water kind of floating around. And before you get started, you take the base of that controller and touch it and hold it down to a little white section on the board, like a little indent. And a magnet inside turns a switch, and the board and controller turn on. It counts down from 5. And in those 5 seconds, you have to hold the throttle on the controller. And this is the big difference between Lift and Flite. The indent you use to engage the controller to the board is that white circle cut out here next to the blinking light. You literally just touch it on there. It's going to start counting down. Squeeze the trigger and hold it. The squeezing and holding the trigger is the big difference between Flite and Lift. But so there's a lot to unpack here. I'm just going to take you through kind of the Flite sequence, and I'll take you through the Lift sequence, kind of why we're rolling through the videos. The Flite controller is always at full throttle. You have that trigger squeezed all the way down. In fact, you have to get the board started. That's the whole thing. Within those 5 seconds, you squeeze and hold the trigger down, and then everything engages, and its baseline set to 1 on the scale. Now you can dial it up or down. This is inherently very different from the way Lift does it. Lift, you can do that on Lift, but Lift gives you the opportunity to set kind of where you want your power level, like 1 to 15, anywhere in there. And then generally riders use the trigger to determine how much power they're going to have within that power setting. With the Flite board, it always starts you at 1 and you always dial it up. So even if you're an advanced rider, like when I got on there, I started at 1. It's just when you turn it on, the throttle's fully squeezed. You start at 1, you kind of get going. I dialed it up to 2, and then I'm on my knees, and then I stand up, and then I dial it to 3, and then I'm up on the foil, and I can dial it up to 7 if I want to go really fast. And then at 7, I was able to adjust the throttle with the trigger as well. It's just a lot different than the Lift setup. So with the Lift setup, I could do the same thing. If I just dialed the lightning bolts all the way down to 1 and saved it, then you turn on the controller, it's at 1, you squeeze it, and then you just hit the plus or minus on the controller to dial up that power with the throttle fully squeezed. We started doing this for lessons on the Lifts, actually, is having people start at 1, fully squeeze the throttle and dial it up. So this is the transport bag for all of the components: mast, rear wing, front wing, charger for the batteries. It's really nice, kind of solid foam with an outside case. Chris is holding the battery there. That's the larger of the 2 battery sizes. They make a Sport and a Controller or an Explorer battery. That's the 2.1 kilowatt hour battery, the big one. That's the same size as the Lift battery. Lift only has 1 battery currently. So you can kind of see here, this guy put together without the wing on the back. The trailing edge kind of looks like a Star Trek Enterprise a little bit with that rear wing pedestal on there. Everything's aluminum except for the wings, which are carbon fiber, and all these pieces fit together to make a working and wonderful hydrofoil. So kind of the end result of this ride and review. We like both the Lift Efoil and the Flite Efoil. Rough numbers, they're about the same price. The Flite sells for $12,935, and that includes shipping anywhere into the U.S. The lift boards retail for $12,000. Right now, their winter special is just under 10 grand for one. And that shipping is not included, so you're going to have to add $350 to $500 depending on where you're at for the shipping. Separate batteries, $3,500 for a lift battery, $3,100 for a Flite battery, so they're about the same. Each company has multiple sizes of wings, multiple sizes of boards, a bunch of options. Going forward, I think these are definitely the two front runners as far as, definitely, there's no comparison as far as e-foils go. We're partial to the lift system, obviously, but we have a lot more time on the lift system. I was pleasantly surprised with the performance of the Flite, and I can't wait to see what both these companies come up with in the future. Hope you enjoyed the video. Let us know if we can get you an e-foil or get you out on an e-foil. Thanks for watching.